Wilsey.
What's up? I'm Shem McGowie.
And I'm David Keener.
And this is the Hourlings podcast project. Tonight, Shay is going to be leading the discussion. Shay, take it away.
All right, guys. So tonight, our topic is retellings. And I want to distinguish that from rewriting. We're not talking about rewriting as an editing practice. We're talking about story retellings, the same story reappearing in different modes, different mediums, different styles. So like one thing that I immediately think of when we talk about retellings are fairy tale retellings, which have happened throughout the ages. But we're going to be talking about that and a couple other things tonight. But I want to start out by asking my colleagues a question. First of all, we're going to take a little vote here. So you guys see a little reaction button on the bottom of Zoom? You guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see?
I don't see that. Where is that?
It's in the bottom right. Reactions next to record.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So if you press that, there's a series of emotes. And we're going to look at the heart emote and the shocked face emote, the one to the left of the heart. So if you think, there you go. If you think that retellings are cool and you like them and they're interesting, you're going to do a heart. If you think that they are boring and should be discontinued, you're going to do a shocked face. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, all right. We have a little bit of disagreement here. So
I'll preface. I will qualify mine.
Explain your vote. Explain your vote.
It's all about the writing.
Okay.
You know, any well-written story, whether it's a retelling or completely original, is completely dependent on the writing.
All right. Dave, want to justify your vote?
Sure. So a retelling is sort of a story pattern, if you will. And I've seen story patterns reused a lot of times. Whether it works or not, it sort of depends, again, on how the writing is and how it's adapted to whatever new setting or time period you put it in. For instance, the movie Outland, starring Sean Connery, is basically high noon in space.
Right. Perfect example of retelling.
Yep, it may be set on the moon of Jupiter, but at the end of the day, it's high noon in space. And it's an excellent story, an excellent movie. I highly recommend it. So when it's done well, and it can be a lot of fun. I've also seen all of Jane Austen's books. I've seen probably 3 or 4 versions of each one in different time periods and settings. Pride and Prejudice being the most notoriously used again and again and again.
Yeah, Shakespeare has been done, in various different settings, a lot. Look at It's a Wonderful Life. I've seen that story retold, I don't know how many places. A Christmas Carol, probably even more, including the Muppets. So, yeah, there's a lot of retelling going on.
Don't get me started on The Most Dangerous Game, where a jaded hunter decides to hunt the ultimate prey, another human being.
Yeah, that's a classic one that's been told over and over and over again. And
in fact, it was told recently in a movie called The Hunt.
Yep. So, go ahead, Shay. Continue.
So I'll justify my vote for why I voted no. I don't like them. I just feel like they're very money grabby. Like I'm the kind of person that groans when Disney says that they have, a live action movie coming out, retelling a classic like The Lion King, which was like literally perfect the first time it came out. There's no need to retell it again. And so, I guess I can see your points. Like sometimes there is a story that really could use a new twist or could really be interesting retold, but most of the time I feel like it's just movie companies and sometimes, maybe even some book companies, authors, trying to pick something that was successful in the past and just respin it so they can have another success and continue to, make money off it for the market. So I feel like it takes away space from original ideas. I think that the more Disney remakes these old classics, the less they're spending their time and attention and money on producing new classics and new content. So I feel like it crowds the market and it crowds the stage for stories to be told. So I don't like them for that reason.
So my only problem with that is if I was going to spend 150 to 200 million dollars on a project, I would want to base it on a tried and true formula that I believe had every chance of making all that money back.
And okay, so from an economic perspective, you're totally right, and there's nothing to criticize. But I'm not looking at this economically. I'm looking at this artistically and from storytellers and from a writer's point of view. And from that point of view, there's no room for the economic argument. Who cares?
But I think we've come to another aspect of the retelling then.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's funny with your examples because most of those Disney tales started out as a fairy tale to begin with.
That's true.
They did as their cartoon, which didn't match the fairy tale really, and now they're redoing them in live action, which is even different.
Okay, that's true, but I think that there's a difference when we're talking about stories being retold because a technology is there that wasn't there in the past to tell them. So like being able to do like a fully feature animated movie for kids from a fairy tale, almost like I don't have a problem with that. Like that's cool because you can't. We didn't have that in the fairy tale version. It's something totally new. So that I can kind of get. Like, I'm kind of on board with that. Where technology advances, allowing us to retell it for this generation.
Well, but I'm going to get you on that then, because back then they didn't have the CGI capability to do a live version. So now you have a new technology that lets you do a live version of The Lion King.
Yeah, but you're kind of on the line there because I mean it's still a movie. Like,
Yeah, I think it's a whole different issue when it comes to movies as well.
Yeah.
Because, like, there's a lot of books that I've read that I get into the Book of Ways and I go, oh my God, this is The Heart of Darkness retold as science fiction. Or, I just read, Liz gave me the title of a book that it was a retelling of The Hobbit in outer space. And, which is, funny. It's almost a parody. When your dwarves are, asteroid miners and stuff. But in a more fundamental level for retelling, I think that there can be a lot of utility for acquiring plots, for instance, out of, old stories that are, past copyright or even, even still.
Well, that's why Marty, that's why I refer to them as a pattern, because I think if you use them as a pattern, you can do some interesting things with them. But if you just do a beat by beat remake of the same story that was told in a different medium, then you really haven't added anything to it. You haven't really added anything in the way of originality or surprises or anything.
Right. Just on a lark. I still have all the books that I had when I was a kid. I had the full hardcover collection of the Hardy Boys. And those were fun books when I was a kid. And it was like 2 years ago, I picked a random one up to read out in the hammock one day. And I read it, and it actually inspired me to write a short story that I wrote. And I didn't call it the Hardy Boys. The title of the story is The Two Daves. So I wrote a science fiction story that was inspired by the Hardy Boys. And, some of the aspects of it inspired the story, but, I didn't rewrite beat for beat. I didn't have the same plot or anything, but it was a retelling. It was inspired by the Hardy Boys. And it was a lot of fun to do.
So there was recently a big hoopla over a ride at Disney World being remodeled. Have you guys heard about this hoopla?
Splash Mountain?
Yes. Okay. So Splash Mountain, it had its last ride and it's being remodeled to the Princess and the Frog theme. And so there was a lot of hoopla because people were saying, whatever. They were politicizing it. But I did read one argument that was not political that I thought was interesting. for renovating the mountain. And they said, one reason why Disney is doing this is because this generation of children do not remember and did not see the movie that Splash Mountain was themed on, but most of them have seen The Princess and the Frog because it's much newer.
I'm
And
sure.
so
I'm sure you haven't seen it.
the one that Splash Mountain based on.
Yeah,
Is it Song of the South?
it is Song of the South.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I've never seen it. Like, it's before my time. No,
I
I'm not. It's not
You'd
like
be hard pressed to find a copy of it.
I know. I'm not like it's not like a statement I'm making. I haven't seen it. I really have not seen it. Just like I never came across it. But
so interestingly enough, it is extremely racist with
okay.
slaves who actually like being slaves.
Okay.
But it has, and this is the real tragedy. It's got an Oscar-nominated performance by a black actor and some really great songs in it.
Yeah.
But it will never see the light of day again.
Well,
and
that's not
nor
that's
really
not the
should it.
topic that I was going for. I was
I know.
trying to make a metaphor
Digression.
to say. I was trying to say that I think one reason why we see retellings happening, especially in fairy tales and children's stories, is because I think that this generation of kids and whatever, the new generation of kids don't often go back and like read that Hardy Boys book from the 60s. They read the stuff that's coming out now. And so these stories that do well, even if they were presented perfectly in their original form or perfectly, as far as public consensus, nothing is exactly perfect, but there's still a reason to remake them because kids don't go back and watch that excellent version that was original because they just don't. It's just to them it's old. They don't do it. So maybe that's why we see retellings happening all the time for kids.
Well, there's also the other aspect of it, which is, and this is really a fault of like the traditional publishing market more than anything. But you could have a classic children's book from the 50s, and it's out of print. Period. End of sentence.
Right.
With no possibility, unless it's Charlotte's Web, that it's going to be reprinted for children nowadays, no matter how relevant it might still be.
Yeah, because kids they will not go back and watch a black and white movie. Like, they just won't do it. But if you remake that same exact movie with new actors, color, then they'll watch it. So,
it also happens today with I can't tell you the number of British series that I've seen that have been remade as American series with American actors.
The Office.
Right. The Office, perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly.
But there's a ton of those examples.
Cracker with Robbie Coltrane. Yeah, there's a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys remember Miracle on 34th Street?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, that's an example of like, I much prefer the original one. Black and white, I thought it was like Chef's Kiss.
See, that story's been remade in movies a ton of times.
Only twice, I thought.
No, there's actually several versions of that. And like A Christmas Carol, God, I have in my collection, I must have 8 or 10 versions of the Christmas Carol, including Bill Murray and Scrooge. But movies is completely different than books.
All right,
and
back to books.
I think that it's probably happening a lot more. People are mining Gutenberg a lot, looking for good stories, because things like Sherlock Holmes, a lot of those stories have been retold in and cast in different ways and stuff, as well as other classic stories that are in there in Gutenberg, Project Gutenberg.
Yeah, I've seen Sherlock Holmes as a female detective with a female Watson.
Yep.
I've seen Sherlock Holmes as a modern day drug addict / crime solver with a female Watson. I mean, I love Sherlock Holmes, and I've seen all kinds of different versions.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and there's a ton of books out there that are retellings of Sherlock Holmes stories that may lean deeper into the inspired by kind of retellings, but there's a ton of them.
Okay, well, what's the line between a retelling and fan fiction?
Readers.
Well, the actual plot. If I'm doing the Hound of Baskervilles, and it's obviously the plot of a Hound of Baskervilles. It's a retelling, and
Okay.
I think that can become problematic if the copyright holder still holds the copyright to the original thing.
Yeah.
And often, there's authors that are happy to, let somebody rewrite the story if you just pay me.
Right.
And I can see you can also play with these patterns. So for instance, I can see Beauty and the Beast. Let's recast it in a fantasy setting. Let's make the beast into a female elf, 1,000 years old, beautiful, spoiled, et cetera, privileged, and unbeknownst to her, she falls in love with a human guy, right? And we've totally turned that around. All the beats might be there, but where they come at you from is completely and totally unexpected, and you do something inventive with it. So there's twists. The human doesn't have magic, but yet he makes a huge impression on the Elven Empire. Whatever. We can make up whatever we want. But the point is, it's what you do with the pattern to put new life into it. To you still want to surprise the user, the user.
Reader.
I'm an IT guy in my day job. You still want to surprise the reader in some way, so they just don't go, oh, this is boring. This is going to happen next.
I guess I don't disagree that it can be done very well and that there can be certain needs for retelling. I think like you brought me to that medium point, but I'm still at the point where like if I'm at the bookstore or if I'm at a book fair with a bunch of indie authors and I read the back cover of one book and it sounds really good, but it's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but it still sounds like it's like, really well done. He's a good writer. It sounds like it's a cool twist. And then I go to the next table and I read the back of that book, and it also sounds really cool. And he's also a good writer, but it's a totally original story. Like 100% all day long, I'm going to buy the original story. Like I don't know what that is about me, but that's just like me. What do you guys think about that?
I would say I like original stories, but at the same time, there's what I call comfort food.
Okay.
And sometimes I just want a nice, good read, and it doesn't have to be a Hugo winning story. It doesn't have to be pushing the envelope. Right now, today, I just want a nice, comfortable read, and that retelling, that might be in my comfort realm.
And a lot of times you may not know it's a retelling until you get 2/3 of the way through it, and you go, "Hey, this is just like Beauty and the Beast."
Yeah.
Where I've seen retellings of Casablanca, for example, in a science fiction setting.
Oh yeah, big time, big
right?
time.
And I'm like, as long as you can surprise me, and amuse me with how you use the story and bent it into this new shape, then I'm cool with it. And there's a perfect example where the people out west, they didn't fight battles and kill off some of their attackers by blowing holes in the dorm to expose them to a zero-G. But that's a nice adaptation for high noon in space.
So my next question for you guys is looking back at like advice to authors, because I like to do that, because I like our podcast to be instructional. If an author is interested in doing a retelling, what should they do to not be boring? What should they do to be different?
Well, it depends what they're retelling, really. What kind of story is it? If it's, if they want to write a science fiction action adventure story, I could see, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody, got a hold of an old Pulp Fiction kind of Doc Savage kind of action story and did a retelling that was science fiction. And most people wouldn't even realize that was the crossover.
Okay. Dave, what do you think?
I think you have to do something new and different with it. The first thing I'd do if I was going to embark on a retelling is I'd be like, okay, here's the shape of the story. Now, what can I do with it? What can I do with it to make it the same but different? What if I gender flip the characters? What if one of them's an alien and one of them isn't? What if, what are the things that I can do do any of these possibilities excite me? What if I set it on an alien planet? What if I set it in space, right? And you're looking for not just the way to use that pattern, but you're looking for something that kind of excites you to the point where you'd be like, yeah, I'd read this story if it already existed, but since it doesn't, I'm gonna have to write the sucker.
Can a story ever be told too many times? Like, is there ever a limit where you guys would say, like, no matter how many twists you put on it, no matter how weirdly, you reset it, recast it, is there ever a point where it's like, okay, that story has been told way too many times?
See, it's always new to somebody. That's what you don't really get.
That's true.
Yeah,
Somebody's
it depends
always
if
seen it
it's the
the first
first
time.
one that you've read or the last one.
I mean, I'll grant you, if I've seen the same story 50 times, I'm not all that keen on the most dangerous game scenario because I've seen it. I have literally seen that story 50 times.
Yeah, and there are some stories that like they came into existence for the very purpose of being retold, like fairy tales and fables, right? I mean, I think that's why they exist, to be passed down from generation to generation, orally, written. So some artists really went to that. So I hear you. Like, I'm kind of in the middle. I think you guys have you pulled me a little bit closer to the middle than where I started. But it's definitely an interesting topic, and it's definitely, for new writers, I think sometimes a retelling feels like a safe entry point into writing, because they feel like they kind of start with a model and they can do a twist on it. And hey, more power to you. If it gets you into the writing game and you feel like it's a good segue, go for it. Or maybe you'll just maybe it'll be your specialty one day. That's all you do. But anyway.
There's one other kind of retelling that I want to mention briefly.
Okay, go for it.
I have a book in my library that is a pure parody. It's called Board of the Rings.
Mhm.
And it is a comedy parody of The Lord of the Rings. And it is an absolute retelling, but it is ridiculous, and it's all humor and sex, and it is hilarious, really. But it's a retelling.
Wouldn't you just call that like a farce?
Well, it's a parody of the original.
Well, that's true. I guess parodies and farces are retellings, aren't they?
And parodies are actually like copyright protected, are not copyright protected, but they are protected. You are allowed to do a parody of something.
If it's clearly a parody, you are not copyright violating.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
That's much better.
That's like Weird Al. Like Weird Al. He can parody the hell out of people and get away with it.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, you could call parodies and farces a type of retelling that really have no restrictions on them legally. So that's interesting. I guess, yeah. I mean, another famous retelling is the phone book. I mean, that gets retold every year. I'm kind of sick of it. Oh, really, crickets? Come on, that was my closing joke. All right, I'm laughing. If I'm laughing,
You
that's all that
still get a phone book?
That's true. You're right. I'm showing how much of an old soul I am. Yeah, I mean, so a good episode. I would encourage people to, if you like retellings, write them, watch them. I hear Percy Jackson is being retold soon. That's a big deal. Because the original
and don't forget,
author...
my next story is going to be a retelling of Cinderella as a military science fiction story.
Okay. There you go.
Not really. Not really.
Shameless plug.
I'd like to see that.
I would read that. I'd read that. But yeah, Percy Jackson's a big deal because the author really hated the first one and ripped him a new one, and now he's involved in the second one. So I'm sure many of our viewers would argue that there was a definite need for that retelling. So it's out there. The need's out there. We'll see it. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, and rewatch this episode as much as you want. Retell it to yourself, and we'll see you next week.
All right, we'll see you.